Reserve study. As Dave mentioned, in the past, I started my own reserve study company and then joined Reserve Advisors a couple years back, and they were the largest reserve study company in the United States. So we were out of Milwaukee, but we did reserve studies all across the world. So I've seen a lot of different types of associations, a lot of different types of components, a lot of different types of budgeting processes that people use, and just really enjoy the business and really think that reserve studies are an important part to Congo Association. Just to raise a hand, how many of you have a reserve study in place right now, or actually use it and follow it? Define a reserve study. Okay, a reserve study, what is it? Okay, reserve study is basically taking the operating budget versus the reserve budget. Okay, we're taking a look at two of those and labeling things out. In a reserve study, what we're going to take a look at is the determination of common property. What's common to the association? Should be in the text of the bylaws of your association. What's common to you as a homeowner? You are responsible for those common areas and maintaining those, keeping them in good condition. All right. Every good reserve study is going to list out all the common elements that you're responsible for and give it a life analysis and a cost estimation. So at the time when a reserve specialist shows up on the property to take a look at everything, they're going to take a look at that common element and say, at this current condition, it's going to last X amount of years, and when it exceeds that time period, it's going to cost you this amount of money. Okay. Now, what happens if an association doesn't have a reserve study in place? You have a special assessment. How many of you enjoy special assessments? Raise your hand. One. Okay. I've actually never had anybody raise their hand. So that's what's going to happen if you don't have a reserve study in place. You're not planning for the future. You don't have a roadmap. Okay. Benefits of a reserve study. Why should you have a reserve study? Besides your property manager telling you that it's a good idea and your board members suggesting it at a meeting saying, maybe we should do one of these done. Well, protect board from claims of mismanagement, which is a liability. Okay? Secondly, ease of budgeting. Set accurate fees. The budgeting process is sometimes very difficult. The managers know that. Do you like having a reserve study in place? Does it help you budget much easier when you have one than when you don't? Yes. Provides benchmarks for contracting projects. Provides an expert opinion from an objective third party, and there's the topic I mentioned before, prevents against special assessments. Okay? It also helps prioritize capital repairs and replacements for your association. Now, I know a lot of you have board meetings and stuff, and there's topics that are brought up. When should we do this? When should we do that? You probably never fight with your boards on when you should do things and what schedule and how they should be done. But a reserve study helps lay that out for you and the board to show a timeline of when those capital repairs should be taken care of. Now, if you have a reserve study, it's easier to sell a unit of a condo when you have that. Okay? If I was going in to buy a condo, the first thing I would say is, can I see the reserve study? I want to see the financial health of this association. I want to see what the cash flow is like. I want to see how they're doing. I want to take a look at it. Associations that have a reserve study in place, it's going to be easier to sell a unit. Increase market value of residential units and reduces costs of maintaining the property, and it creates fairness amongst other homeowners. All right? Spreads it out amongst the other homeowners of replacing capital items in your association. After all, as a board member, you're on the board, you have a fiduciary responsibility to maintain that association. The reserve study can help that out for you. When to conduct the reserve study? We're often asked this quite a bit. When should we have a reserve study done? When's the best time? Now. The best time is to get one done right away. Or at development, or when the developer turns over the association turns it over to the association. Now, there's also transition studies that we do as well, or that we did do. Transition study is a study that's more of a defect study. It goes back, and I know this is really hard for you to believe, but developers actually mess up once in a while when developing associations. And a defect study, they'll go back, take a look at everything, and then you as homeowners in turn can go after the developers. They really like those a lot when you do that. So you should get a research study done as soon as you possibly can. Some people may say, well, our association is so old, we're in so much trouble. That's okay. A lot of times, a good research study company will be able to work with you. We'll be able to accept gradual increases to help you with your funding. Reserve study update. Okay, here's a common misconception. A common question that a lot of people ask is, when should we have our reserve study updated? A lot of people will get a reserve study done, they'll put it on the shelf and they'll say, we got it done, we're all good, and they'll never use it. They dust it off maybe once or twice a year. They're not using it. It's a tool that should be used. But professionally, we always recommend that you should have a reserve study updated every 3 to 5 years. Why? Well, changes in costs, materials, and new building products. Right now, we're experiencing that all over the board. Those things change. That affects the funding for the reserve study. Effective maintenance practices. Following the maintenance practices that have been recommended in that reserve study. If you haven't, they'll change things dramatically. Actual implementation of the original reserve study. Was it actually used? Was it actually followed? And maybe you add some different components to your association. Maybe you add a $2 million portable share to the front of an association, something like that. Some large item. Once you add that, it's going to offset the cost of everything. You need to add that in the reserve study, have it done then. And finally, environmental impact. In the Midwest, where I'm from, there's tornadoes in summer. There's hail damage that can offset the cost of the reserve study and the cash flow. And here you have hurricanes once in a while, or bad windstorms, or whatever. That can change the makeup of the association. So you want to make sure that you're updating your reserve study, you're following it, you're using it as a guideline and a tool for your association. Industry updates. This is becoming more and more popular. Government regulations are now leaning towards making reserve studies mandatory. Now, I checked before the presentation this evening, and South Carolina does not have any regulations in place currently that mandate to have a reserve study done. But in 19 different states, there is some sort of regulation where they suggest you have a reserve study done, or suggest an independent third party come in, take a look, and do a reserve study. If you have a reserve study, banks are much more likely to give you a loan for capital projects. A bank is going to say, can we see the reserve study? If you have one done, they're much more likely to help you with that loan. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they're going to want to take a look at that too. Okay? FHA requirements. They now require that you have to have 10% of the operating budget going towards reserve, or you had a reserve study done within the last year, and it's up to date. Okay? If it's done in 5 years, you're going to want to see it done within the last year. So you have to have an update done in order to get the FHA approval. Other conventional mortgages, capital project loans, again, going back to the banking, they want to see that reserve study is done in place. So, primary goal of reserve study. What is it? Well, annual budget planning. Set monthly and yearly homeowner assessments. Okay? Set it accurately, set it fairly, set a guideline for you to follow for capital repairs and replacements. Making sound business decisions. The reserve study is going to help you as a board making sound business decisions. Instead of, not going to do anything, just sit there, don't reserve, just get special assessed. That's not sound business for your association. Preventing from special assessments, financing capital projects, and deferring capital projects. It's going to help you, again, prioritizing for capital repairs and replacements. Which ones should we do now? Which ones can we offset to the future? How should we take care of those things? Plan for capital projects, allocate money between CDs and more liquid deposit accounts, Then lastly, coordinate operating expenditures with capital expenditures. It matches everything else, setting the guidelines for your association. Primary goal from a homeowner's perspective, personal financial planning, distribute to potential buyer. Again, talked about that before. They can see how your associate, what's the health of your finances in your association and how it's distributed. And again, understand board's decisions, okay? You may be very upset as a board. Why are we spending all this money on this project right now? Well, you have the meeting, an annual meeting, you come in and say, look, the reserve study has laid this out for us this way. This is why we're making this decision. It may help with some arguments that you may have in board meetings. It may help ease the pain of those situations. Choosing a reputable reserve study provider. Okay, you want to take a look at the education that the person who's doing your reserve study has. I would suggest that if you're hiring a reserve study company, you take a look at what kind of properties have they done. Do they have experience in your area? Do they know your area? Have they done other properties in your area? Another thing is that, do they have an RS? And what is that? It's a Reserve Specialist tag that is given out by CAI, Community Associations Institute. In order to become an RS, you have to do at least 30 reserve studies a year, okay? And CAI has the right to pull at random one of those reserve studies from you, review it, and make sure it's living up to the guidelines and standards of Community Association Institute. So you have to have that in order to keep that RS designation. Again, I talked about experience. And then third, this is really important, quality assurance. All right, make sure they have a quality assurance program. Make sure they aren't just coming out to your association, taking a look at things, running back, plugging it in, and sending it right back out to you. Make sure it's being reviewed by at least 2 or 3 sets of people before it comes back to you. Because as a property manager, do you want to keep calling up a reserve study provider and saying, hey, this is wrong, my board is upset with me? No, because you're paying good money to have these done. You want to make sure that the provider is reputable and knows what they're doing. And they don't have a conflict of interest. They don't have a vested interest in your association. I recommend that board members probably shouldn't be doing reserve studies. Why? They have a vested interest in that association. I'm not saying that this happens, but sometimes it does. They may cover up a big capital project because you may not want to pay for it while you're living there. I'm not blaming anybody that they do that, but we've seen stuff like that happen. So they defer it out, they put it out there so that they don't incur those costs. You want to make sure that they don't have a conflict of interest in your association. So those are kind of some guidelines and some things to take a look at when you're choosing a reserve study provider. Good?
Okay, we'll do questions right at the end.